Here we go.
I'm so glad to see you all. I'm glad you're here safely. How many people were coming onto campus from outside of campus? Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Roads, stuff. Okay, yeah, no, I know what that means. You know, if you would have said that the roads were like, dude, I'd be like, what? But no, suck. I know. So, so cool. No, and it's so weird because it was just like I'd have a coat on, you know, I'm ready to get my shorts off and my flip flops. Although I am proud to say I don't see many of you with flip flops on, which is interesting because typically in Minnesota you can wear those things anytime, you know. So and not have Fred Flintstone feet, which is interesting. You know, Fred Flintstone feet were all hard and crusty. Okay, never mind. Somebody said, so I did want to check in and on some of your sites. So what are some of the things you're doing at your service learning sites? I know places where you are, but I don't necessarily know what you're doing. So what kinds of things are you doing at your service learning sites? Yeah.
Working with reading partners.
Okay.
So we we're working with kids that are behind that do them and reading them. And it's a lot of fun. This morning I worked with the kid in the park here. He was super awesome. It's like really funny, but really hard to keep on topic. So imagine just like little kids that don't like reading, trying to keep them interested in reading, but super fun.
Cool, cool, cool. Tarky was his name. That's wonderful. And then the reading corps that you're with, that's a branch of AmeriCorps, is that correct? Yeah, yeah. And all of you are familiar with AmeriCorps? Cool. So back in the old days, I was a part of a group called the Summer Reading Corps in St. Louis. We did technical assistance for AmeriCorps. So it was the first AmeriCorps program. And Bill Clinton came and did all this stuff. And so when I see AmeriCorps in its program, I'm like really proud. And I'm like, I was there in the beginning, you know. That's cool. Other folks, what are you doing?
So I work at Hub Center. So it's an adult education but public school system. So I'm working with two teachers for two beginning writing classes for ELL adults. So the first one is kind of floating and helping, so they're on computers. So most of them are computer illiterate as well. Just kind of helping them navigate and doing like grammatical corrections, those kinds of things. And then the second class, I'm pulling out like one or two students doing individual tutoring based on what they need.
Cool, cool, cool. And what languages are they coming from, or what countries are they coming from?
Yeah, so we have students from Vietnam, China, Japan, Somalia, Kenya, students from El Salvador.
So what do you say to people who say, before those people come over here, they need to learn American? What would you suggest to those people? Given your experience.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying so hard. They're the most motivated students I've ever worked with. It's really impressive. They are really trying, but it takes time. I mean, like, so you feel like, especially as an adult, even when you're versed in a language, it takes like about 10 years to get to native level.
Yeah. So it takes time. So if you ever hear somebody say that, say, hey, buddy, hey, sister, give them some time. Right? Do you think that those people are exceptional, or might they be the norm of people coming from where they come from? The norm. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So, other people, what are you doing? Where are you? Yeah.
I'm at a church, and they have an after-school program for students with volunteer students, and then once a week with their middle school and high schoolers. So they do a lot of like homework help, and then like some other activities too, and it's like a lot of it is just like making like bonds and like having a place that they feel comfortable in and like being able to go to like have a friend base. So
Sweet, 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 sweet. Yeah, we do know that having one caring adult can change the trajectory of a young person. Right? Having one caring adult. And it sounds like you could be one of those one caring adults, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. Anyone else want to share with their science? Yeah.
I'm working at January, so I'm at Iron High School, and so
You
I'm
mean
in-
iron jail? No, I'm just teasing, just teasing, just teasing.
and so
Micro.
I'm working in school, and I'm taking girls up talking, going to a lot of basketball games, and just pouring into a lot of soccer and running and stuff. And trying to learn to hang out with kids and hang out with
Wait, whoa, wait a minute. I thought you were cool. And so now you're trying to, you have to,
make it with a high schooler.
because what do we know about cool is relative, right? You know, so yeah, what was cool today, you know, like I walked into a group and said, you know, I'm totes down with you guys. They did that, they snickered, not nice, you know, totes was like totally like another time, you know. So that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. Anybody else want to share before we move on?
I'm at Oberlin Community Center, and it's after school program for kids that went through fifth grade. Majority of them in middle school, and when you get there, they're doing their homework and making some class, and they're doing students who that's educational or hands-on, and there's so many things to do at the community center, but it's so hard to get them to do them. They just want to stick with making slime, or like making cookies, or doing things that they already know they like to. So then we try to brainstorm different things that are fun to watch at the same time and they
So why might, because this is interesting, because I experienced some similar things in high schools too, right? Trying to get them to try new things is like really, like, I don't say pulling teeth, but like really difficult, right? But why, what's their inclination to stick with what's familiar? Because this will help you understand this middle school. What is it? Don't want to fail, right? So, and what does failure look like in middle school? It's not that you just didn't do it. Yet all these other kids looking at you saying, "We see you didn't do it. Oh, do," you know, just stuff like that. And so they said, "Well, I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to keep doing what I do until one of them or somebody's a herd breaks right, and then well, actually, yeah, that is right for you, right? That breaks right, then we'll try that. Which then means that everything you want to do with the middle schooler, you have to keep in the back of your mind what, or what should be in the forefront of your mind actually, when working with middle schoolers. So they may not initially do it, not because they don't think it's fun or they don't think it's cool, but what's the other voice that's playing in middle schoolers' head? Don't mess up for what purpose?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem. Let's not get embarrassed, right? So as you're working with them, that for middle schoolers, it really is important that outward image that they portray to other people. And so you, as a teacher, have to keep that in mind, right? So anytime there was something goofy or silly that had to be done, because sometimes you have to do goofy and silly things, guess who was the most goofiest, awkwardest, appearingly incompetent person in doing the thing when I'm asking my students to do it? Me, right? So I'd be the goofiest, or I'd be the blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't work for everybody, and that's not everybody's thing, but for me, it was helpful to help bring down that guard so that they were like, well, at least you weren't like him. And I didn't mind that because my self-esteem could handle that most times. One thing I did pick up from my middle schoolers was that when I first, and this is something you don't want to do, particularly if you're going into a classroom or in any situation where you need to have just a little bit of credibility. I started my career off having my middle schoolers and my high schoolers calling me by my first name. It's kind of the culture of the school I was in. And people called me by my first name, which led to being too familiar. Right? So, Dre, what's up? I'm like, whoa, okay, Andre is good. Dre is, that's what my mom calls me, right? You know, that kind of thing. But not so much that that was a problem for me, but it was a problem for them because sometimes those lines got blurred for them. And, you know, they wouldn't get a grade that they wanted on the test. They were like, Andre, why did you do that to me? I'm like, I didn't do that to you. You didn't study. You know, you didn't. So that's something else to learn. You know, keeping those boundaries. Cool. Well, it sounds like you're having fun, doing good stuff. So I'm excited about that. I think it's important to be salt and light in the world, and we're doing that in real practical ways. I also want to say I have been absolutely impressed with Bethel's library, both the physical library and the virtual libraries. Before you guys came in and you know, I was taking a break and I was just kind of going through the library, looking at videos and all sorts of stuff. And I found stuff that when I sat in your chairs, my instructors and my professors and my mentors were sharing these videos with me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, they're still around. Like, you know, some things you have a great friend or a teddy bear or something, you know, you think it's gone forever, and then you open up a box and there it is, you know, like, oh, look at that, and then have all these flashbacks of memories and stuff, and so. And I don't know that if I told you this. So, however extreme you may think I am today, you know, I am so much more moderate than I was when I first started this work. Right? And I guess it's probably unfair for you to do an autobiography and not me do one, right? So, you know, this won't help you, but I think I'll do that for next year. But my dad was a Black Panther, and I think I shared that. Did I share that? Okay. So my dad was a Black Panther, grew up in the church, blah, 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 blah. My father got saved, left the Panthers, got saved, became a pastor, all this kind of stuff. So I had a certain kind of way of looking at the world. Now, what I will also tell you is that it is my belief, and this is, well, you'll know that this is meaningful to me because I'm telling you about this. But my father went out on his own ahead, without a denomination, without anything, started a church. And that was rough on my family. Absolutely rough. And, you know, I don't know if anyone is connected to a pastor or his family or his relatives or whatever. It's especially if you don't have any backing, starting a church is really rough. And so my dad's congregation was probably about 75 people, which for the time was a pretty decent sized congregation, probably made up of maybe 7 solid families, you know? So everybody knew each other and that kind of stuff. And the stressors of trying to do that ripped my family apart. So my parents ended up getting a divorce. Not because of the church, but because of all the stressors surrounding that, right? So when that happened for me, growing up in the church where my dad is my pastor, there was no separation between my dad and God, right? So as a little kid, my dad and God are synonymous. And when I became a teen, they divorced when I was 17 when they divorced. And we had the church we were at our 12th year of having this church, right? And my parents get a divorce, and so I turned my back on God because I turned my back on my dad because he let this happen, right? So my dad and God were the same, so they both, got a middle finger from me. Okay? So, but having grown up in that atmosphere, I had a strong sense of social responsibility and a strong sense of morals, right? Now my morals were now based on what I thought, what I thought was right and good and all that kind of stuff. So I went out in the world and I did all sorts of stuff. I experimented with all sorts of fake traditions and alternate realities and dimensions, right? So I did. I was Dr. Strange, focus on the strange, right? So I did all this stuff and all this stuff. But along that journey, I started understanding and recognizing the social inequality. And I think I was about 17, 18, I was 18, 19. I started getting involved with this camp and met some folks who became my lifelong mentors. But they also had to, I was a tiger with big teeth, right? And so I would, I'd walk into diversity conversations. It's the white man's fault. If the white man hadn't died, right? I'm devouring anytime. And if a white person says something, I'm jumping on it. If a white woman started crying while we're talking, because I'm growling and barking and being loud and they get emotionally overcome and start crying, I bark on her. I increase my intensity because I think she's manipulating with her white tears, right? I mean, so I was just not a nice person, but I was going after it. I was Paul. Now that I think about it, I was Paul doing God a favor by bringing down the white man. I was doing God a favor. But like Paul, on the road to Damascus, he had an encounter, right? So I had a friend, because my biggest thing, and sometimes you'll hear people talk about this, and now I poo-poo that because I know better, right? You'll hear people talk about this concept called white privilege. Has anyone ever heard that, right? Or you'll hear people talk about white supremacy. So I'm riding that horse, right? I'm like, yeah, white people got all this privilege and they're not sharing and blah 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 blah. And then I bumped into an anomaly for me. An anomaly is, this is how things are all supposed to be, but then there's an outlier, right? So I met an outlier for me, and he threw me. Like I didn't know what he was. My shining light on the road to Damascus, right? And his name was Jared Johnston, and he's a dear friend to this day, a very good friend. And he was from Missouri, and he grew up in Appalachia. And are people familiar with Appalachia, right? Or Ozarkian, the Ozarks. So Appalachia and the Ozarks are where white people live, but they're typically more rural than some of our urban kinds of folks. And am I defining that pretty well? I mean, people have a good sense of that. So sometimes the nicknames we would give those white people would be like hillbillies, right? Or and we talked about this earlier, rednecks, that kind of stuff. So people who white trash, people that are less sophisticated than kind of urbanized white people right now. And he was poor. He grew up poor, just like I grew up poor. He went to. He had a number of experiences that, if race was taken out of the equation, you wouldn't know the difference between the two of us, right? Except that I grew up urban and he grew up somewhat kind of rural, and that threw me for a loop because it was clear that he did not have this thing called white privilege, and so I had to. He really challenged me to rethink what that stuff is, and we'll talk more about that specifically. But he caused me to really rethink how I thought about stuff. And then I started figuring out that the more tenacity that I put into my dislike and almost hatred the further away from the goal I was getting. It's kind of like, and I don't know if you've ever done this, or you've probably seen it dramatized in some way, a TV or a movie or something, where someone puts a feather or something in the water, and they try to go after that thing, and the more they go after it, what happens to it? It moves further away, right? And typically, why is that? When you kind of splash the water to reach after something, why does it go further away? Because the waves, it makes waves, and those waves carry the thing away from you instead of drawing it towards you, right? And so what I found was that the relationships that I was trying to build and the way I was trying to convince people that my thing was right wasn't working. It was actually doing quite the opposite. I was creating people who hated what I love. And what I love is this idea that we should come together and eliminate all this other stuff. So I had to transform. I had to think different. I had to be different if I wanted different results. And so, I want to encourage us to think and be different, particularly when our behaviors or our thought processes or our attitudes aren't getting us to our ultimate goal. And so in that journey, I couldn't be whole until I went back to the beginning. I had a friend who used to have an expression: to make better, you must start over. Right? A lot of times we try to put tape on things and we try to fix things when actually we just need to throw it away and just start over. Right? So let's just start over. But I would say for me, I wasn't able to make that leap until I went back to what was it that I was taught about human being? What was the context in which that was taught? And for me, that stemmed right out of my Christian faith and my Christian belief. And so heading back towards that actually gave me what I was trying to find in my own works, and made me less angry. Let me be able to see things, if not how they are, but at least give me a perspective that I didn't have or wouldn't have without that stuff. So there's that. So the first thing I want to do this morning is I want to pass out. How many people have read the letter from a Birmingham jail? Oh, then why am I even going to do it? Yeah. We'll do this. We'll spend some time on that letter because I think it speaks directly to what I was just addressing, but actually what I want us to talk about and think about in the class. So I'll give maybe about 15-20 minutes to read the letter again, and I want you to highlight things that stand out to you, that speak to you, that are either encouraging to you or a question that you have as a part of this letter. All right? So I'll give about 15 minutes to do that. I'll pass out the letter and we'll talk about it. Oh. The fact that you've read this letter in other classes speaks to the brilliance of the school that you're attending. Did you guys get one? No. Nope. Thank you. All right, cool. As people are finishing up, let's take a break and then we'll come back and dive into this. So, those of you who need a break, go ahead and take that. If you're finishing up, please do so, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
But I'm taking care of my grandma for the next like week and a half. Or like, so I need to have my phone ready when she calls. Is that would you bother that I send you back? Like that as well? Okay.
I understand. Yeah,
Okay.
cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you like rap?
I'm going into hip hop.
Very.
Culture,
Okay. Cool.
kind of directly around it.
Okay. Cool. So who's hot these days?
And, I mean, you got your perennial, people powers, getting, but you can see the future. And so, Kendrick Lamar, I'm very, I listen to a lot of future, future man, he's, I guess, he's hot too.
Okay.
Neo is a trio that is pretty hot. So yeah, but I listen to a lot more underground stuff.
Okay. So I was just reading about a dude named Nipsey Hussle.
Mm-hmm.
Is he any good?
He's old.
He's old. Okay. All right. So he's been around for a while.
He's been around for a while, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, all my people are like ancient. Yeah. anybody I can name would be ancient. That's funny. Cool. I was out in St. Francis, and a young guy comes up to me. He was like, "Yo, man, what you think about that Tech 9?" And I was like, context is everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew he wasn't talking about a weapon, so I assumed he was talking about some music, but I have no idea who that is or what kind of style of music that is. So it was kind of funny. I was just like, I know what you're talking about, but I got no idea what to say about that.
Exactly.
So it's kind of funny.
No, I would say I listen to a lot of the people who listen to music. I don't know, he's around kids, and I don't know, just, I like to look at the music and look at the artists. A lot of these artists not making some of those choices. And I look at the psychology as like, this music isn't one of their vices. I don't know. I think it takes mature ears to listen to it, but frankly, a lot of their fans aren't mature, so a lot of people could see that as them dramatizing. I mean, not dramatizing. It's glorifying what they're doing, but really it's in their outlet.
So when I was coming up, so the late 80s, hip hop, and it's so funny because people are like, hip hop started in the 90s. Well, it actually started in the 70s, but that's a whole nother conversation. But at least in my community, started taking a hold in the 80s. And the thing that saddens me about what hip hop has become is it's become, in my opinion, very weaponized.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, in the original, in the late 70s, hip hop really was about having fun. It was about partying. It was about and partying in the sense of not getting blitzed or but just having a good time, right? It was all about a good time. And then in the 80s, it shifted, and I thought that this was a healthy shift because it became
more social.
Yeah, it was very social, right? So all the cats that I love, and it's funny. My brother liked NWA and Two Live Crew and all those kind of cats, and I was totally Public Enemy, Africa Bambaataa, and kind of more positive stuff. But now I don't know, and I don't listen to the music enough to know if there's a balance. When I was coming up, that was cool that you had a balance, right? So you can get your little gangster rap on, but then you got your positivity over here, so you can stay balanced. But now I don't know that I necessarily see any balance. And so when I say I feel like it's been weaponized, I think it's been a tool to keep people in a cycle as opposed to a tool to actually help them liberate how they think or how they engage. So do you think that is there a balance? I mean, like, what kind of artist would be that balance?
It's hard because that's always the argument looking nowadays. That's the argument now. What is it really thinking? I see a lot of these artists were immersed, they're addicts to something. Right? What they rap about, they have problems, and that's what they rap about now. And it's always a question, it's like, it's not right, but people are listening to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So my dog likes antifreeze. And he would take antifreeze over water. What's that? It's not healthy. It's lethal. Is what it is, right? So like and not that people are dog, and I don't want to make that correlation, but at some point there's got to be. So I like Lupe Fiasco. So the last like hip hop piece or something that I really got into Lupe Fiasco. I don't know if he's considered old now. Is he considered old?
I mean,
His career is kind of old.
His career is kind of old.
For a hip hop artist.
yeah.
Yeah. So like after that, I'm in no man's land. So I have no connection to that stuff. But it does seem to me that we got to do something, or people have to wake up and realize. Like somebody was telling me about mumble rap. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Where somebody that's
Future is kind of
Is-
got that going on.
Okay.
You just can't really like understand what they're saying the whole time, but that's true about a lot of music.
yeah, that just sounds weird to me because like.
I mean, it still sounds good. You just don't know what they're saying.
I mean, a lot
And
of
that's not nobody has a problem with that. I know the devil, and I want you to kill you. And, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Right, yeah.
I just think it's interesting. I find it interesting because I'm a lyrics dude. I want to know what I want. You know, even when I go to Cirque du Soleil, I get a little unnerved because they're singing stuff, and I'm like, well, what are the words? You know. No, I want to know what you're saying. What are you saying? You know, and even if it's a foreign language, at least I can decipher that. I can find out what whatever. But yeah, and I'm not trying to slam your stuff. I'm just,
I see it. It's one of those things where I listen to gritty stuff. Like, I don't listen to the most like before music, but I just I don't know. I think they build these followings and it's like a system, and I don't know. People can buy into it, but again, I don't know if it's very positive. At the end of the day.
Yeah, just interesting to me. It's interesting to me. So, yeah, we'll get back on track. So, all right. So, what I'd like you to do is spend some time at your table, kind of talking about what were some things that spoke to you, and then we'll take out of that. We'll talk in the class about things that spoke to you as a class. So if there are any themes at your table or things you underlined or outlined, or if you're the only person at your table, you can go to another table, but we'll spend just about 5 minutes or so kind of talking about the things that we thought about. And many of you have read this before, so I'm really curious as to what came out of a second look at this document. All right? Cool.
Blame the guy with cash. That's a good one there.
I think that this was very well organized. Like what he wanted to do, like he tells, like this is something that was almost separate. Talk about having a situation. That was he wanted to make it, and then he wanted to do it. And it got to the point where like he had to take back that thing. And he explained how everything was
Yeah, he paints some really good and also just really sad pictures of just like the sad reality that's occurring right now. And I mean, he knew his audience, so he's like, you're going to criticize me, but like, this is going on in scripture, and this is what you guys base your beliefs off of. And you're okay with that, but you won't be okay. You know, you're okay with Nebuchadnezzar standing up and saying that these practices are ungodly, but you won't let me have a peaceful life. You know, he's made a argument of points of like, you're okay with this happening in scripture, but you're doing the same thing.
I love that. I also think it's really well written, super articulate,
Yeah.
super well. Just as he describes stuff, and really bring it in there. And I really like how it kind of, it's well written in the way that he really separates all of his points, where he talks about nonviolent protest, and then he talks about moral law and why he disobeys unjust laws, and then he gets into his disappointments about white moderates and in the church. I thought that was interesting, and then at the end he really just shows resolve. And he says, "You know what? We're not going to stop, and this is going to work." So I thought all the points he made were really good, and I love when he went back to scripture and even back into American history to make it
Kind of carry out that too. You can't the issue with they waited for laws.
Yeah, that's
one source. Doesn't make a big deal, but just to see how educated he was and multiple areas and how he articulated it and wrote it so well done.
and he wasn't completely easy to understand.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any blame being put on the people. Like he was I mean he was
Well, I mean, I think he made some pretty big accusations. Like, hey, the church has sucked. The white moderate, not even like the white extremist, but the white moderate. Like, he's like, how much longer do we have to be told we need to wait for freedom? Like, what right do you have to tell us? Like, I mean, I think he did so in love of saying like, hey, I don't want to attack the church. I thought that was really important to formulate that. But I mean, I think there are plenty of shots fired within this.
I love how he takes those shots, and then there's a little bit of I like where he talks about. He says there can be no deep disappointment where there's not enough.
Absolutely, sure.
It's coming from a good place. He loves the church. He loves all this stuff, but he's right. You can't. That's where disappointment comes from. When your parents are disappointed in you.
When he says, I expected this, and he said, I expected my biggest backers to be the church.
True, but probably really hurt them.
Yeah. So.
Are there any contemporary parallels between this particular document and what we're seeing today in our world?
I was going to bring that up too. It's kind of similar to see not necessarily the same things are happening. It's obviously, segregation is illegal now and all that stuff, but still kind of see kind of the hatred and especially with the church, kind of still people still in that mindset of inferiority and superiority with it all, and then seeing too how they took action with protests and stuff like that, and it's still being done today. I thought that was interesting to see how some people now they idolize Martin Luther King, like do all this great stuff, nonviolent and everything, and now they bash what they're doing today. They're doing the same practices, so I think that's an interesting perspective to look at.
Yeah.
I think how I see it, I just, I'm having, if the question is still being asked by the children, why the white people doing it like this? I think I've heard those questions. I don't know what is, we made leaps and bounds, but there's definitely a problem.
Yeah.
If the children are asking why, once they figure out they're racialized, then they kind of feel like they're asking these questions. The children are like continue this. You know, if we keep being racialized as we are, on the same thoughts, then you can't have that battle inside your head between two races. It's just gonna build, like you're saying, a disconnect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the Nebuchadnezzar piece really stood out for me. Like that was, yeah. I thought that was a really good point. And I actually had, and it's funny. I've read this several times, but I went back to look up one of the people that's referred to. So he does this. Paul Tillage. He kind of does his drive-by and says, Paul Tillage says that separation is evil. Right? And so I went and looked him up, and absolutely fascinating man. He's a German American. He's a Christian philosopher, an existentialist, and a Lutheran theologian. And so, like, just looking at his background really adds credence to this as well. That like this isn't just one man's individual idea, but Thomas Aquinas, Paul. I mean, he just ties this into all of this ancient philosophy, which then begs the question: if we're so advanced, why are we still having these same problems? Which goes back to your question or your position that the young people, if young people are still asking this question, how far have we actually come?
That's exactly. When I think about this stuff, I think about the young people, and if they're still asking these kind of questions, something there's still that barrier where it's been broken down. There's holes in it, but I think people are still putting bricks back into it, and it's just bricks back. I mean, I think the ultimate goal is to have that barrier just gone.
Yeah. So cool. Thank you for letting me jump in.
All right, let's bring the conversation back. And so first, let's start off. I want to start off with the people who said they kind of read this or seen this in class before. Did you get anything different out of looking at having a second look at it? Was there anything different that stuck out for you for those people who had looked at this before, from where you were then and then where you are now? Did anything jump out differently? Yeah.
One thing that I noticed recently is when we talked about the model, the white model,
Yeah.
and kind of it came to like modern positive food things and how they like he was talking about like individual choices and things that together as a group some of them want to step out and like the group tends to be more and more like individuals who want to like how the like model like I really support you guys with this and how frustrating that is to you really support or do you one but not like committing.
Right. Yeah. Other points. You saw it here, second time around, you may have seen it first. Yeah.
I think we're just talking about how it's kind of experience like kind of keeping it like deep into like the model and how we would like to think of ourselves as like different ways like people who would actually like Martin Luther King's eyes and how they just happened. And he kind of like listed it. And I think the first time where I thought, and I think that doing it again, it's just a good challenge. So maybe like would I actually do that? I think that's maybe like thinking about
I have to see that. I love Milwaukee. It's one of my favorite places in the town. Other folks. So now for all of us who now just go dancing, you're interacting. What were some of the conversations you had at your table that you thought were fruitful or powerful? Yes,
We
great.
talked about how, like, they thought it was so important to be nonviolent, and how that was really, like, how they put in so much effort for it, that we want to, I mean, just specifically do nonviolent.
One of the things that I liked that stood out for me was the comparisons of Nebuchadnezzar. You know? And so, Mishael, Azariah, and I have to look it up again. Yeah, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? Or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, stood up and we hold them as people who are to be followed and noted as followers of the faith. And friends of Daniel, they have to be friends of God, right? Because Daniel also went through a lot of persecution. So, what do we say about those people now who stand up or cause trouble? What are some of the ways in which we look at that? Interesting. Yeah, it is. And I think I said this yesterday, I may have said it in the morning, but I think I said it in the afternoon. Just the whole take a knee thing. You've seen people do that. People, and how do people feel about it? How are people feeling about people taking a knee during the national anthem? Not necessarily how you feel, but how have you heard people express their feelings about it? A lot of people are angry about that. Where's the anger? What's the root of their anger? Why do they? They're offended by people taking a knee like that. And I think that I think that's interesting because I know that when I've gone to watch a game at a friend's house when the national anthem is played, no one stands. Right? Or I do know when I'm at a high school outing or gathering, and they play the national anthem, we stand. Right? And even people just out of general respect, they stand too. They may not put their hands over their heart, they may not sing, they may not, do other things, but just out of kind of communal opportunity, they stand. But the people who are some of the biggest critics don't stand in their own homes. So is patriotism something that we show when we're out in public, or is patriotism something we have all the time? Yeah, so I was thinking that's interesting. So yeah, I think that's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens during the Super Bowl. So that's going to be hosted here, and I'm sure people will have something to say on all sides about that particular thing. So people don't like that. But people also haven't liked, I think, Minnesota a couple of times. There have been groups of people who have stopped traffic, right, to bring light to a particular thing. And how have you heard people respond to that? Positively, negatively? Do people like it, not like it? Yeah.
I've already thinking like the next thing I think that you would maybe be fine with that because it's orders less important than testing. But also like the legal too. So but then it's like just less not like the legal thing.
Yeah. What have other people heard? Have they heard similar things that But people don't like that, or people, yeah, they really should just get out there and do more of that.
I just feel a lot of negativity because where people were hiring the segregation with the people looking at that in people, and then having opportunity.
What do those numbers look like? Those numbers of officers and civilians, what does that look like? Does anybody have numbers? Well, one is too many. I will say that. So I'm not trying to belittle anything. I also heard of some things that are always, it's always interesting what social media does. And I appreciate President Trump for identifying fake news, of which much of it, which he creates. But I appreciate that we have this fake news stuff, because I've also heard, during some of these protests, that people died because the ambulance couldn't get to the hospital. So, I like to do research on stuff like this stuff, particularly horrible stuff like that. Like that is just absolutely horrible. And I search the internet, and although Google isn't smart, we talked about that before, right? It doesn't make anything, but it is good for searching for things. And I have actually, unfortunately, not been able to find where that was something that actually happened, but it was certainly reported as if it had happened. Okay? I believe in this particular event in Minneapolis, where a cinder block was dumped on an officer. Absolutely, unfortunate, uncalled for, not appropriate by any means. But I also would suggest that the folks who organized that particular event, those people weren't part of that, right? And so how do you manage that kind of stuff? And so I think a lot of times we're really quick to hold up. Now, here's the other thing. In 1963, was Dr. King a hero? No, he was what? He wasn't a hero. I mean, a national hero. He wasn't a national treasure. He wasn't, right? I mean, he's in jail. And he said he was willing to take the punishment for breaking the so-called laws to do those things. And so I also want us to remember what it's like to put things in hindsight, right? So when people can't speak, that's when we say the best things about them, which is weird, right? And I think I shared this before. I've had cousins that have passed or relatives that have passed that were absolutely not nice people. But at the funeral, they had nothing but nice things to say about this person. And I'm like, are you serious? No, really? Are you serious? And so, but we like to make martyrs. It's easier for us in our consciousness to make martyrs. And that King now is one of those martyrs, right? I was joking with someone, in 1,000 years, it'd be funny to see the third book of Kings, right? So being Martin Luther King and whatever. But not that they should open up the canon, and I'm not suggesting it, right? Don't leave the canon the way it is, and let's just keep moving. But those are some things that we consider. And I would argue that many of those things, the arguments that we hear today, can be answered by the document that Dr. King has. So then the question becomes, if we're still asking these same questions, have we really changed that much? And that's for you to answer. I don't have the answer for that. That's for you to answer. And how do you answer that? You answer that through your actions, your behavior, through the relationships that you build. The challenges that are before us are not new challenges. What we do know is that ancient books still work because human nature hasn't changed that much. And so that's important stuff to realize and to realize and think about. I love this particular letter because it always encourages me to reach to the top of my intelligence and think about things in very critical ways that are actually designed to help people. So I
find great inspiration from Dr. King in this particular letter. And there are others, and we'll touch on a couple of the other ones as well. Especially the most profound speech being the mountain speech, which since chills down my spine every time I either listen to it or think about it. But we'll talk about that later. So, did I show the ABC Bakery video? No. Okay. So I want to show that real quick. This, because it directly relates to this and a group that you just identified as presenting challenges. So many of you have probably seen versions of the show. Would you mind hitting that up for me? And then, so we'll watch this.
And you see something wrong taking place. Let's take another look at what happens when our innocent bystanders reach the boiling point. Keeping a heart of Texas at this little roadside bakery, previously being served with a coffee and cake. No, man, we don't serve puzzles here. I'm sorry? America, war with well, you're a terrorist, is what you are. So, you gotta take a drink of counselor, we don't serve the town. The other customers at the bakery near Waco seem to hear everything, but they barely look above the woman, even when the language is tough to take. Get back on the camera and go back where you came from. Sir, I'm American. I'm born and raised. No, you're not. Americans don't like how I'm Muslim Americans say these are words they hear all the time in all parts of the country. But here at the bakery, what the customers don't know is that this Muslim woman and the man behind the counter are actors. The bakery is working with us, all part of a 5-time three-camera experiment on prejudice and patriotism. They say the business helpful. Can I ask you to us? When no one even tries to help you, he makes us direct at people. Sorry. You might order me one. That's fine. I can give you the money. Please, no. But when you get to the cold weather, finally, you get to help her out here. Open up. Why not? Make a big deal of money. What are these traffic here? Laundry, something out there. The one outside was 76. Now we're going to put it. Owns his own business. Disabled. Filthy. She's not a others seem to agree with our actor as to who's in America and who's not. Is it all based on the belief in New York? I'm an American citizen. I just realized they have to Well, I'm sorry. Why are you dressed like a girl? It's a religious purposes, sir. I don't think you have any So I'm religious. I don't wear, Halloween costumes. I mean, am I wrong here, sir? I run my business the way I run it. The man behind the counter is doing the right thing. But the fact is, it's against the law to deny service to someone based on their race or religion. My name is John Quinones, and I'm with ABC News. What did you think of what you heard? He told her he wouldn't serve her. Well, he can say she wouldn't serve you. She come in and first without a shirt on. But she wasn't barefoot or without a shirt on. Well, she wasn't like that. What do you mean? Guys want to play that, do the same thing. You wouldn't let Muslims shop at your place? Not there wouldn't. We never expected customers to be so candid. How do I know you don't have a problem with that? Watch what happens this time, when, once again, our Muslim woman is denied service. This is not right. And again, maybe reserve the right to not serve. That's correct. That's correct. He not only commends the man behind the counter for his discriminatory behavior, but he gives them the thumbs up. Not one, but twice. But when I approach, helped us design our experiment. Although born in Chicago, says she's constantly characterized by fellow Americans as the enemy.
Yeah, we start off with a nurture, the follower, how head,
While attending college in Texas, he says she continually suffered verbal abuse and had even been physically attacked just because he loved her.
well, I feel like I'm from here. I mean, like, I'm an American, they're all moving on it. You were born to be an American. And I'm like, so what makes you American?
It's a very bad.
And I don't feel like being in America, I should have to fight this battle.
Meanwhile, back in the bakery, our actor is at it again. So how do I know you're not a terrorist? Terrorists look like you. But this time the customers are sympathizing with the Muslim woman. Right, I know, but can you blame me? Why? What's the problem? Okay, sir. I'm an American. All right, we're warm with you. So is mine. And he's not the only one who walked out angry. Excuse me? No, you're a bad American. Time and again, people speak out with their pocketbooks. But nothing happens with this man. He's not a good American. My son just came back and serving in the army for over a year in Iraq. And there's nothing to do with program. I understand that, and I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe, I can't believe people will criticize it. I'm sorry to offend you, sir, but I've got to live with myself. The man bound to fight back. I will let people know that I've stopped to really come up from violence, so I'm going to why is this because they're trying to have the justice that binds us together, the justice that makes us decide any threat for that anger and the justice you can undermine the entire system. No, I'm not. We're not just wanting more customers are outraged by our actors' patient behavior that approval. You're not exactly American, but no one is more persistent than these two young women. You can't believe what they're doing. They're using hard, taking back out the parking lot. I mean, I gotta protect my customers, okay? Well, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to protect them. How do you know? I'm sure I'm trying to kill. The office is definitely American. And unlike the others, they don't just shoot and anger. They stand their ground. They know. Yes, because I believe it's a real. And guns and weapons that they can use. It's only when you catch up with a terrorist that they finally let their guards down. Just watching them stand up for what they believe in. First, it's protecting the video. And the way they defend the nation. Not even stuff like that. Because they wanted it to be and remember this man, John Stewart in Iraq, he's also every person says he's respect. No matter what situation, no matter how many arrests. Yeah, you have to see the action so clearly. From a thumbs up for prejudice, but that is thumbs down. Huge difference in that. Most of them, they're patriotic. At the end of the day, 13 people stood up for Muslim woman, while 6 decided to destroy. But the majority of the bystanders, 22, did or said absolutely nothing. That was most likely to Muslims like Muhammad, who was watching our experiment. In fact, those Muslims did often avoid going out on themselves.
It's really sad because I'm always around the community and things on it, all this is not going all the time. But that one time that I'm alone and something bad might happen, I'd rather be safe and sorry.
It's no wonder this young woman was so moved by the people who came forward to protect the queen
Thoughts?
So we know that this is done by ABC. ABC News is a subsidiary of Disney. We know that Disney or ABC News are masters of telling stories, right? So they set it up really well. Anybody else pick that up?
They've been the hard tests, right? So they certainly tried to set this up in a particular kind of way. Is this scenario something that could happen in Minnesota?
Yeah. Really fast. Yes. Yeah, so there was 22 people who said anything. There were negative, there were 6 people who were negative, and then there were 13 people who were positive, right? So, the very people who were good. What might be some words we might use to describe this negative system? It's the guy who's like, she shouldn't get the apple strudel, or she's not American. We've got the man part of this American, right?
What are some words we use to describe this people? Ignorant.
Whatever it is you use to describe it, we can use because yeah. Okay. So you described the mic drop, so I appreciate you explaining that. It is this magic drop. Or the message happening, the theory that we all know things in one form, which is American. But those ideas of who that American is really specific. And so if anything else you are, if American, or American, you want to be two have the house, no, 2 houses now, right? A cabin and a house, 8 eggs, a golden, retriever, blue old man, and 407 all these. What else let me say about these things? Yeah, okay, so yeah, we'll do that. Okay. Yeah, so we'll underline the old. Discriminatory? What does that mean? Discriminatory.
You just can't do a mic drop without me, you know.
Yeah, we're gonna put discriminate on the side. Discriminatory, shun, discriminatory, all
All right. So a word I might use is that these folks just flat out idiots. Right? Just straight out flat. Oh. Another word that oftentimes is used is prejudice. There's people that have prejudice. So we'll come back to this language system in just a second. Positive 13. Notice thinking about the people who stood up to their favorite back. What did you notice about it? That some folks left the bakery to take themselves out of the situation. But they said some very interesting things for those people who did leave. Right? What kinds of things did they say? So I'll never come back to this business. You're wrong. I knew you would pick that up, right? Everybody else is pretending like we didn't hear that. F you! You know, were there some attributes of the 13? Yeah. I thought one thing that was like what she was like, this is something that we upset the judge, and other across the board, regardless, whatever. You can't. Right. So one thing we could say about that is that they could see our common humanity, right? I mean, really, shouldn't everybody have access to apple strudel? You know, do you really want to hold people down? Now, if it was fruitcake, I could understand. You know. So one time I got 120 fruitcake. You know, the thing that makes fruitcake tasty is supposed to be the alcohol. Yeah, it was supposed to be like bourbon or whatever. And so you tell you, one time I opened it up, it was whoa! I'm not old enough to have this fruit. Anyway, so the 13th can see our common humanity, right? I would also suggest that the 13 is one by themselves, right? So they had partners that they could either emotionally tie themselves to, or they actually physically had someone to that. I would also say, you know, we might say that they are also hashtag whoa, rock and roll, whatever. I don't relate, sorry, man. It's just like that. But we might say that they have an awakening, they recognize all this stuff, and that they're. Yeah, or something I used when I did middle school was this idea of the giraffe, right? So if someone sticks their neck out, someone else is more likely to stick their neck out. Right? And so, and I would, the way that I would also say that is that, well, no, I'll say it later. But how can I concisely say that? It's the opposite of bystander. The upstand. Oh yeah, we'll use that. Thank you. Whoa, upstander effect, right? Do I have to pay you royalties on that, or you just probably. No. So we have the negative sixes, we have the positive 13s, and then as Greta was saying, the most problematic is the 22. And what do we call the 22? We could say bystanders, right? Bystanders, passive. Yeah, so they look for convenience, right? I would, yeah. So when I look at those types of things, there are things that I have to take into consideration. Right? So first of all, who produced it and what kind of thing they found it. Right? So obviously, ABC News, Disney, they're going for ratings, they're also going for kind of shot factor. Which then leads me to the next set of considerations is what are the things that I don't see that may have happened in this film? But I'm also mindful of the things that I did see that happened in this film, right? So, excuse me. So we don't know what those 22 people did outside of that race, right? So some of them may have said, I'm not ever going back to that bakery because that's just not a cool thing to do. Some of them could have said, yeah, I agree with that rock. I'm coming back here every day. And so we don't know what decisions people made, but we do know what we saw in the video, and then the lessons that we can draw just from that small video, right? And so the other thing I would say is that the bystanders pass it, but I would also say that this is the group of people that refer to themselves as the silent, or are referred to as the silent majority. So the silent majority was a concept introduced into the American psyche through the work of President Richard Nixon. And one of the things that President Richard Nixon said, well, his focus really was on this idea of law and order, right? So he was the law and order president. And what Richard Nixon would say is that I'm doing this thing. People rioting in the streets and all this kind of stuff and protesting some of the things that he did. I want to say, like most presidents, everything that President Nixon did is actually more balanced than what we typically think about or talk about. So there were some good things that happened. There were also some bad things that happened, but I think we could say that about any American president. But one of the phenomena that peeked its head up during his presidency was this idea of the silent majority. And so oftentimes, the rationale for certain kinds of behavior was that I am speaking for the silent majority. And what do you think that concept means, the silent majority? I have all these supporters, but they won't speak, and so because I'm such a kind and good leader, I'll speak for them. Okay. So the silent majority. So let's go back up to this -6 for just a second. Where do the -6s, these people that we say are discriminatory, prejudiced, ignorant, believe in this melting pot thing, their ideas are outdated, they're older, they're bigots, where do they get their encouragement to be that way? Yes. So maybe their family. Let's stick with the film just for a second. In this film, in the short clip that we saw, where did they get their encouragement in this film? So from the guy who's already being prejudiced, for us. So it's in Texas, Waco, Texas, to be specific. Not far from Joanna and Sherry. Love Sherry. Anyway, sorry, that's HGTV. On the show I know on HGTV because it's on Netflix. What I would suggest is that those -6s get their encouragement from why might I suggest that? Well, why am I saying that? in Dr. King's letter, who is this? It's the white moderator. It's the white moderator. The silent majority. The people who may or may, and we don't know because they're being quiet. But, and I think I said this before, and I said it on my podcast, and I'll keep saying it because I think it's true until Steve Bannon tells me that it's not. That the white nationalists, somebody asked me, said, do you believe that President Trump is a white nationalist? Do you believe he's a white supremacist? Do you believe that he's a neo-Nazi? And I said to them, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And they're like, well, what do you mean it doesn't matter? I said, well, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, think he supports them. And so as long as they keep thinking it, it doesn't matter what they think he is. Until he puts his foot down and says, boom! And then they scatter back to the corners. So these 22 are actually out of these two groups. And so here's something I think is interesting. So if we just look at these numbers, right? People will ask, 103 diversity challenges are being done. Are we getting better? And if I look at these particular numbers, and if this is as a microcosm, what will my answer be? Yes, of course, yes, it's getting better. It's getting better. Right? So we got 13 people who are positive and 6 people who are negative. So I'm excited about this. Excited about these things. So things are getting better. But is there any reason to throw a party yet? There's no reason to throw a party. Mostly because these people aren't in a position to actually attack. Now, you've seen this play out in movies. I've never had it happen to me personally, but you've seen this play out in movies where something amazing happens, and the group is doing a thing, and the monster jumps out and rah! And you know, all the cool kids are like, yeah, let's go. And then you have the one kid who's like frozen, right? And that kid is eating, or the other kids come up, you know, and like, let's go. But you, and people are like, why aren't you coming? And they just can't move. Well, what is the explanation in the movie as to why people don't move in the face of these attitudes? They're in shock. They're scared. So where does the shock or the fear come from? So that's fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's biological responses. And why? But why those things? Yeah. Right. Okay. So those kinds of stressors. Anybody have family members that serve in the military? Right. Okay. We know that servicemen and women don't talk a lot about their stuff, right? About what happened or what they have to do. And I respect that. But in your conversations, did any of your family members talk about being afraid to do what they had to do? They identified there was a little bit of fear in them doing what they had to do. You've got to talk to them about it, right? Ask them about it. So this is what I know about some of my friends. So I am old enough that many of my friends who went into the military are now retired. They retired from the military, and now they can do other things. And so when I was younger, and we would ride or see each other out or whatever, I asked them about what was going on with them, and I've also learned a lot about military service, particularly working at another county and working with veteran services and all that kind of stuff. Understand all this. So one of the things I think is interesting is that many of my friends told me that they were afraid. to be deployed. They were afraid of it. It was uncertain, and people were losing limbs, things were bad happening to them. But they also said something that was very interesting. Although they were afraid, they were also what? Prepared. Now, just having fear by itself will stop you from doing things. And are there things? So I don't know what your relationship with your parents is like. But there are certain things that I wouldn't do because of the fear of disappointing my parents. Not the fear of the consequences, because I can handle the consequences. I learned how to weigh that out. Like, so if I do this, this will be so fun. It's worth 2 months, in my room, right? So I learned how to do that. But the thing I did not want to do was disappoint my parents. Anyone have that kind of fear for their right? So there's a certain kind of fear that will keep you from doing things. But then there's another kind of fear that if you are prepared, you can take that on. And so what does the military do to prepare people to move beyond being afraid? Yes. So they condition response. What else do they do? What else do they do? They send them to a place. When you first sign up, you get sent to a place. The basic training or boot camp, if you will, right? And in that boot camp, what do? They practice, they drill, they give them all this stuff. And then so do you get all of your tools at the beginning of your basic training? You typically don't. You get the tools that you need towards the end of your basic training. Right? And when the military deploys, do they send one person by themselves? No, they send a group of people. So not only if you want to engage this fear, or get past this fear, you have to recognize that it's something that you train for. It's something also you have the right equipment for. And thirdly, it's something that you do with someone else. It's not something you do by yourself. So many times these folks, these 22, feel like they're alone, they're by themselves. They haven't thought about this thing. They haven't equipped themselves or haven't been equipped to deal with that challenge. So I'm going to ask you, in your home, did your parents have an emergency plan? Like if something happened at the house, you know what to do. This is the emergency plan. Do you have one of those? Yes, okay. So did anyone have an emergency meeting spot? So if anything goes down, this is where we meet. Where was your meeting spot? The mailbox, all right? Was that close to your house, far away? Okay, so at the end of the driveway, we'll meet at the mailbox. What was it? So go straight across the street to the neighbor's house. Anybody else? Across the street. Why did your parents set those as meeting spots? So you're prepared. So any emergency happens, everybody knows what to do. Have you had to use it? In most cases, the things we prepared for, we don't have to use. In car insurance, I will keep paying it because there will be a time that I need it. Even though I don't understand why I gotta keep paying for something that I'm not using. But hopefully, it'll come in handy, right? So we do those things. So oftentimes, when people encounter stuff like what's happening at Bakery, they freeze because they're not prepared, or they feel like they've been alone. And so for you to be active in the world, I want you to start thinking about this conversation. So what if somebody calls me out of my name, or calls my kid out of my name, or calls somebody else out of my name? How do I engage with the way that is a manifestation of my philosophy, my theology, and my morality? How do I respond? Now, I will tell you, context is everything too, right? So that doesn't mean that you speak out on everything all the time, but you do problem solve on your hand. You say, what do I do? So I'm in North Africa. I'm in Egypt. A big group of guys, Egyptians, come and big group, 6, 8 guys, whatever. They come up. They say, "Are you American?" And I swagger. I square my shoulders. And I said, "No, I'm Canadian. I'm proud of America." Okay, but I'm looking at these dudes, and they weren't asking me to ask. They were making a statement by the 6 of them cornering me and asking me if I was American. What would you call that? What would you call the statement that I made? What would that be? Yeah. In the scapegoat? What would you call it? What's that? Flight? I call it smart. I don't know about you. I call it smart. Why? Yeah, I look at this context and I'm out of the country. I'm out of this, and these guys don't look happy. You know, and I don't know where the consulate is. You know what? I'm gonna take this one for the team, right? Yeah, no, I'm Canadian. Right? The funny thing is, they didn't know that, you know. So sometimes it's important to recognize your context. So I'm not expecting people to jump out and say, or not crazy stuff, but to put yourself in harm's way to prove it that way. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, so this is what we say about these negative sixes, and we use words like they're discriminatory, they're prejudiced, they're ignorant, they believe in this melting pot thing, they're outdated, they're old, they're bigot. And once you define them as that way, you tell them about themselves in that way. Do they thank you? Are they appreciative? No. Right? No. So I know many of you probably have grandparents or old school folks who, uh, so right around Christmas, lots of people have oranges and fruit, right? Fruit baskets. So you can't do that. You got nut baskets or whatever. So in typically right around Christmas time, there is a mix of nuts, of shelled nuts, and that's when your grandma pulls out at least my grandma will pull out the nutcracker, right? Either the one that's at the puppet or the one that gets the hand. And my granddad was so strong, he was just taking nuts. And that was how he showed manhood, right? Is what you do. Right? But there's always this mahogany that referred to as a facility, and it's again, anybody seen that? It's like a orange peel or orange wedge, but it's mahogany, it's hard. Um, well, before it was popular in the country to call them facilities, they were called by another name. Does anyone know what that other name was? So they used to be referred to as nigger toes, right? Has anyone ever heard that or heard? Okay, so it's a couple people have. All right, cool. So did the person who's calling them nigger toes create them? Did they make them? No. They operated in a context where that was what they were called. And for some folks, they don't know that it even has a different name. But it does. They're different. Now, how would and who, for those people who in a family or friendship typically would call them that, or have you heard that from? The older people or younger? Older people, right? And typically, or often, it's a grandparent that uses it, or a great grandparent that uses this kind of thing. Right? So if you went up to your grandmother or your great grandmother and said, Grandma, I just want to tell you, you're such a bigot. Stop using that language. it's a bigot, if you're a bigot, or you're discriminatory, how's that gonna go over? Not very good at all. Why? He's like, wow, I was just gonna tell her. Right? No, why does that not go over very well? It's just an attack, right? So when we tell people about their bigotry, and we tell people about how bad they are, blah blah blah, they think us for that. They oftentimes feel like they're attacking, like that we're attacking them, right? And in response, they build up this huge problem. So I'm going to teach you at some point how to get beyond this thing. How do we help with this? Get to a different place. The other thing that to remember about 13 is that we become these upstanders when we know what we're talking about, when we're confident. And whether that's book knowledge or the knowledge that we get from our interactions with other people. So we're talking about that. We'll come to discrimination, come back to discrimination in a second. But I want to talk a little bit about why the clerk felt like he could interact, talk, and why other people joined into that, right? So, what are some of these mindsets that allow him to do that? And largely, what we recognize is that the people who were saying no to her getting apple strudel really don't care about her getting apple strudel, right? What is their greater concern? Why are those people adamant about not allowing her to participate in our American system? They have a time schedule, and so not letting her get apple strudel is going to mess up their time schedule. So if they, you're talking about these, maybe 22, right? If they interacted, it could cause them to do that, right? Possible. But I want to go back to the negative sixes. So what are the fears that the negative sixes have? Yes. It gives them a sense of superiority. When do we talk about superiority? What do we say about investing? It is an overcompensation of inferiority, right? So if I'm getting a sense of superiority, it is typically because I'm masking or I'm trying to bring someone else down so I feel better. So I agree with you that it gives those negative sixes a sense of superiority. But what is their fear? What is their fear other than being inferior? Yes. That they're giving in to what? So the fear of moving on, fear of giving in, but giving in to what? To change. Letting their country go. The fear, can you turn that light on? The fear of losing power. The fear of losing power. And what is power? How will we define power? How did your 8th grade teacher help you define power? How is power defined? I know I have some physicists in here, right? Budding physicists. So what is power? Yes. The ability to affect change, right? And I would suggest just change it just a little bit. It is the ability to do work. Or get things done, right? So power is the ability to do work, to achieve a goal, or get things done. That's power. So in our society, what are the tools that we need to be able, the tools that we can use to get things done? Money. Money, 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 money. Money. What else is another source of power? Land. Land. Education. Some religion. Okay. And I'll say access to jobs. And in particular, this country health. Power. Education, jobs, money, access to power. So in this particular context, and I would say that this actually transfers probably to some colonial and imperial contexts as well, where there were colonial powers or imperial powers. Uh, we see these kinds of phenomena even here in the United States, right? So there are social groups that we're broken into. And so what are some examples of social groups that we're broken into in the United States? What are some social groups we're broken into? Or what are the social lenses that we use to either identify ourselves or identify others? Even more core to things that you might see on a job ad. So gender. What else? What's the matter? Once we start rolling, you see exactly where we're going. Race. Age. Religion. Social economic status. Education. Place of residence. What else? Class. So we'll put that under kind of social economic. Okay. I'd say language, abilities, and size. Okay. So when we talk about this power dynamic, I want us to recognize that there is typically a dominant group and a target group when it comes to power, particularly in how we look at the United States, which actually empowers the number sixes, the bakery guy to feel like they have a right to act or behave in a particular kind of way. Right? So, and the dominant group has open or easy access to power. All right? And dominant groups have limited or no access to power. So part of what King's letter was really talking about was the power dynamic that's in the United States. That there are certain people in certain ways that people are saying, we want to be a part of the society, but we're not being allowed to. And here are some of those things. So when we talk about this idea of gender, Which gender has easy or open access to power? Males, right? And females, although it feels really weird right now, but there's this kind of this backlash or this response to all this male stuff that's making people feel like women have all the power and men have nothing. But I do want to say, so like with Matt Lauer as an example, people are like, well, he just got fired for blah, blah, blah. No, that dude was nasty. He was nasty. He had a button installed. Did you guys hear about that? He had a button installed under his desk so that when the females were coming to his office, the door would lock. So even if they wanted to get out, it took. I mean, dude was nasty. But here's the thing that people aren't talking about. He didn't install the buzzer himself. NBC paid for that buzzer to be installed. It was on a purchase order. Somebody signed up on the purchase order. Somebody installed it, but none of these people said anything about it. And so he's the only one being held accountable. But that's a whole nother thing. So in terms of so-called race, we know that it's typically in terms of easier open access to power. And there are lots of people who like to argue with that because it feels, again, sometimes it feels as though white people don't have the power because all these other folks are influenced. But what we recognize is that the structures that we're operating in lend themselves that even if you aren't white, if you appear white, you have greater access to goods, jobs, services. And we'll talk more about that too in just a second. In terms of age, what age has the greatest access to goods, jobs, services? Middle age. Typically, this is referred to kind of 25 to 39. 25 to 39. But I would also offer you that most advertising is aimed at 13 to kind of 22. If you look at most of the commercials around beauty, and most of those folks are around that age, right? But in terms of having access and political clout, it's that age range between 25 and 39. Anyone ever tried to rent a car? Right? When do you get the price break on renting a car? 25. Okay. We also know that men and women can sign up for armed services at 17, 18, but really don't get rights outside of the military until they're 21. So that's an interesting thing. So that means that between 0 and 18, limited access, and I would say 40 plus, although it's so one of the things that really made me nervous when I quit my job was the fact that I was about 39 when I quit my job. And the idea that I would have to go back into the job market scared me because historically, at least in my family and in other people that I knew who were trying to get into the job market back at 40, was a very hard task. And many folks ended up not coming back into the mainstream job market because what do companies and organizations want? They want very fresh ideas. And for whatever reason, they think 40-year-old dudes like me, we're not fresh, we're not cool, we're not hip. Look, I like Gucci, man. I'm joking. Anyway, so, I guess that proves the point right there, right? So there's that. But we also know that a lot of times kids don't get treated as if they have rights until they're 18. What do you want? I want a hamburger. No, you're gonna get a hot dog. So parents oftentimes indulge that. In terms of religion, what religion has the greatest access to this job services in life? Christianity, right? And then I'll just put others here, right? And some people say now, and I'm going to say this. This is very controversial, and if you want to write somebody down, feel free. But I think this is very interesting, particularly for Christians, because oftentimes Christians will point at Muslims and say, "We are, we don't get to be Christian, but they get to be Muslim." And I think that's very funny because people will point to, well, they get to wear their hijabs and they get to go pray when they want to and all that kind of stuff. And I think, and the reason I think that's interesting is because why is it that they're able to do those things? Yeah. Okay, so we celebrate those things publicly, but I'm not quite sure that's why they get to do this on a day-to-day basis, on a regular basis. Guess why they get to do those things? Because they're observant? Because they asked to do those things. I've yet to see a Christian outcry about the fact that we want to pray and such a thing, and somebody has denied us access to doing that. I've not seen a rally that said that. I've not seen people, well, these things are being taken away from us. I don't see that. So, in a lot of ways, I just think what I admire what the Muslims are able to do that confidence. And mostly I admire that because they're uncompromising about that in certain respects. Where I think Christians on a large scale are very into compromise, even on things that are very important to them. So I always think that that's interesting. In terms of economic class, who has the greatest access to goods, jobs, services, and money? I would say the what? I would say the kind of the upper class, if you will, right? And I consider any person who works for a living not a part of the upper class. Like if you got a punch a clock and you have a time card, this is not the level of class we're talking about, right? And then down here we say the working poor or the working have limited access. In terms of education, I would say formal education, and mostly, kind of high school plus. High school plus. And then this would be no formal education. Right? No formal education. I would say people who live in a home or have a home have greater access to those people who do not have a home, who do not have a place to live. Obviously, neighborhoods determine whether it's more access or less access. Language, dominant language is English. Target languages would be others. In terms of abilities, people who are temporarily able, who have the ability of their limbs to operate in the world, but we also recognize that it's temporary. Right? So people with disabilities are limited in their access to goods, jobs, services, and money, while people with temporarily able people have access to that. There's a thin veil between the so-called able-bodied and being so-called disabled. Right? One fall, one trip, one disease, or a culmination of things that engage or mental illness, right, or imbalance, moves us from one category to another without a whole lot of effort, right? So those things. And then lastly, this idea of size. And that's important too, because I think it's probably one of the biggest places that we allow intolerance or we allow bigotry or discrimination to happen, and that's with size discrimination. So let's look at some of these isms and what these isms end up looking like. So in terms of gender, we call that sexism, which is also related to, well, we'll come back to that. And then the ism for this is obviously racism, ageism. We call this religious bias. And then we call this classism, the socioeconomic status. This is education bias. We can call that homism if you want, or whatnot. There's typically not a way we talk about that. We do call this language bias. And we call this ableism and sizeism. So the reason I wanted to point this out is because there are a couple of other things that are important to recognize about this model. One is I didn't make this up, so I'm not saying that this is, I didn't make this up. This is kind of how power structure lay out. One thing I did want to say about this is that there are ways in which many of us are on the top and the bottom. So we all have privilege, so-called privilege. We have access, we have advantages, and we're also limited in those advantages, right? And if we're not mindful of the advantages or the ways that we're targeted or the limits that we have to our power, then we can use those things as weapons. And when I say we use those things as weapons, if we don't recognize how we're on top and bottom of this diagram, we will say things that are hurtful to other people like, why aren't you like I am? Well, because of some of the places where I find myself in this diagram, I might not have the same advantages that other folks do, which is not an excuse, but it is a rationale for why I work as hard as I do to get where I am. Right? And then for other folks, we may find ourselves in totally one group or another. But what that suggests is I understand what is going. I have an understanding of why I am what I am, and I can do something about that. Right? I can do something about that. And when we look at these different points and where we are, one way we talk about this is this idea of intersectionality, and particularly when we're working in classrooms with young people, we have to understand their intersectionality. So, as an example, I am not just black, right? What else am I? Just from our conversation, what else am I? I'm male, right? And so because I'm black and male, that offers me both opportunities and holds me back at the same time, right? So I'm black, I'm male, and I'm also cisgender. Are people familiar with that concept of cisgender? It means that my sexual identity and my biology match. So I'm cisgender. So I present as male and I identify as a male. We can talk about sexual identification and that stuff a little bit later. But so I'm cisgender. So I'm black, I'm male, and cisgender. In terms of education, where do you think I fall? Do I fall in formal education or informal education? very much formal education, right? And you know, when I started doing PhD work, someone, one of my radical friends, was like, you're in the white man's system. You getting a PhD in the white man's system. I said, yes, I'm trying to solidify my place in the white man's system. So anyway, it's a bad joke. But no, but that's where I am. And so I find myself on both top and bottom of this, but I have to recognize that there were people who sacrificed so that I could stand on the shoulders of giants. And so do you. But some of our giants were stuck in mud, while others were on firm land. Right? And so if I don't take account of this, then and this is not about blame, fault, shame, or guilt. I can't blame or fault my grandparents for what they did or did not do. All I can do is build on what they did. Right? And so I'm proud of what they did. But I also recognize that I wouldn't be where I am if it were not for them. And so my objective is to make sure that the young people that I work with are also proud about that, and that they remember to look back and see who your brothers and sisters are that haven't necessarily made those dreams. Has anyone seen, there was a video, there was an activity I used to do, you double check the time. There's an activity I used to do, and until I figured out it was foolish to do that, maybe I could find it. Has anybody seen it? Like it's either a Vine video or it was either it was the privilege line exercise. Anybody ever seen that or done that? Let me see if I can. Yeah, here it is. Anybody seen this? Right.
Nothing was done by pushing the legal screen right now. When I say done, I'm right. It's done. Done.
Stop right there.
So I used to do this. I don't know why. No, I don't know. Context is everything. Why would this be foolish for you to do at that point? Because a lot of people get a head start. So we're going to end up this. Context is everything. I did it a couple of times, and it discouraged me. I didn't feel right in my spirit. I was trying to figure out why I didn't feel right in my spirit. And everything he's saying is right. It's true. It is right. He's not telling the truth, right? But then I thought about the context by which I was doing it. At this particular point in your life, whether you have a head start or not, who are you sitting next to? Who are you sitting next to? What do you call each other? In some cases, you call each other friends. What do you call each other? Peers, classmates. You're in the same place. So this particular activity doesn't quite get to what it needs to get to, or what he's trying to get to, because at this level, it doesn't matter because you're all the same peer. So this is the equalizer. You are in the equalizer right now. So whatever so-called advantages or the disadvantages that you have, this process is the equalizer. It's the equalizer. And some of us have earned the right to be equalized, and some still have what he's demonstrating as privilege. But once I get across that stage, it's me and you, baby, right? It's me and the degree. We're gonna make something happen out of it. So part of our job is to make sure that we understand this, but recognize this does not limit human potential. You know what the valedictorian of my class was when I graduated from high school? You know what he is now? He's a drug dealing felon. Drug dealing felon. White guy. Smartest dude in the school. Is he drug dealing? And not to say that having a felony is I'm not trying to say that. What I am saying is all the things, the great hopes that the teachers had for this guy, he didn't have for himself. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? He was supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. Because if you look at it by the numbers, that's what he was supposed to be successful and do all the great things and blah, blah, blah. But he had a different way of seeing the world than what they had. And that's what I want us to be able to offer to our students. So wherever they are, this is what you're up against, students. People in our organizations, this is what we're up against. So now that you know how this deck is stacked, it's now important for us to learn how to play our cards. Anybody spades players? Yeah. We should learn how to play spades. Because the thing about it, what do you recognize about a spade's hand? What's powerful about it? Okay. So the great thing about a spade's hand, even if you have a bad hand, if you know how to play, you can win. So anybody playing a game where you have to hit Trump, maybe hearts or whatever? What do you know about Trump? What does Trump do? Not the president. In the card game, right? What does a Trump do? It takes the suit, right? It cuts. It can. There can be another card that is higher than that, but the Trump undermines that and lets you win. So, so I think that's interesting that this dude's name, down a J, I'm going to cut out everybody else. Trump, so great marketing. I would just say that great marketing. Great marketing. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much for the great class. We are not at the Science Museum tomorrow. I apologize. I tried to get tickets, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So we're not at the Science Museum tomorrow. But I promise you we'll play games the whole time, okay? Just to make up. We'll play games the whole time. Maybe Trump. Maybe Spades.
You ain't short on bro. Shorter than I've ever been. So you
Yo, Matt. Things.
know he would.
Rectify that. Ouch. Let me get out of here. So he just sent me a thing. We got. Just so I just sent this to Koen. So see if you can contact these folks tomorrow, or even this afternoon. These are the two sites that we have open. Homeworks in Minneapolis, or Terry Hessen at Central Community Services. And you want to put in your email? Do you think they would have openings? Should it? Oh, really? So do you want to go over it today and just talk to Terry? Okay. 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 Do you have time to at least call her today?
Yeah, I think we'll call it.
Okay, cool. So that her number's there, and then at least have a conversation. Start. Thanks. Have a great day. So, what'd you think today?
Yeah,
Was it
I liked it.
okay? Yeah. Cool. Good.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, I had actually forgotten how intense these classes are, until I go home and I'm like,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh, I got to do this again tomorrow. Like, oh.
All the
But I need your number for breakfast? No. If the Australian Open was on in live time, and the matches don't go off until 6 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, I can watch